what is going on with Ecuador's economy right now? Just in general terms, good, bad. Are there any industries that are doing very well? Are there any industries that are struggling? What's going on in Ecuador?
Sure. So I think we can talk for hours about this. We want to try to make it an interesting summary. So Ecuador got dollarized in 2000. We had a huge financial crisis between 1998 and 1999. At that time, we had the sucre was our own currency, but due to high hyperinflation and a huge financial crisis in the banking sector, where almost 40% of the banking sector was gone, the president at that time decided to adopt the dollar as official currency. And obviously that helped a lot because that had an immediate shock in terms of controlling inflation, which was not under control. You didn't have the capacity to issue money, which basically reduces pressure on creating additional inflation based on expansion of the monetary balance sheet based on nothing, based on air, basically. That's what was happening before. And then the challenges in a dollarized economy, I would say, is that you don't have enough tools that you would have. You have your own currency in case that you have external shocks. So having said that, the dollarization of the economy has been great for financial sector, for the economy itself, and for every single Ecuadorian, which in relative terms is richer than it was before when we have our own currency. Obviously, that comes with limitations, and that's something what is happening now, and that's what I discuss now very briefly. But when you have a dollarized economy, first, you don't have a lender of last resort, right? So basically, the lender of last resort or the systemic bank is Banco Pichincha in this case, because it has almost 30% of market share, around 20% of market share on the loan side and the deposit side. So that bank needs to be run in a very conservative way. And that's the approach of the senior management and the main shareholder of the bank. They know the responsibility of the bank in terms of hedging and covering the economy because of the large size of the bank. So in a dollarized economy, what is also important is that to take a look continuously to the balance of payments, because at the end is the result of how many dollars you receive and how many dollars get out, right? If you have a net outflow of dollars, then the economy starts to shrinking, you have a liquidity problem, and then you don't have any capacity to issue money. So basically, the economy starts contracting, it starts decelerating. And the opposite happens when, for example, you have a very high oil price and you start receiving more oil revenues, the economy starts growing again. And that what creates is an economy that shrinks in growth, but not dramatically, not at the levels that are required in order to reduce poverty to more manageable levels. And that's the problem at the end. How to attract investments, because that's the other part of the balance of payments, in order to create more industries, more employment, and to have long-term growth that will reduce eventually the poverty level that is being important in Ecuador for several years. So that's, I think, very relevant. And now, when you take a look at what's happening now in Ecuador, when you take a look at the international reserves of Ecuador between the end of 2022 and 2023, it decreased by 50%, 50%. From 8 billion to 4 billion. If you compare, to put that in relative terms, if you take a look at the economy of Peru, which is an economy of $225 billion, the Ecuadorian economy is an economy of $110 billion, half of what is Peru. Peru has international reserves of around $70 billion. So the reserves that we have as a country are very, very marginal. We don't have own currency. We don't have a capacity to create more reserves with instruments. So we basically we depend on the dollars that come from the balance of payments. In that situation, what has happened in the last year is that a couple of things. The first thing is that we have been receiving less financing from international counterparties than we received in the years before, specifically between 2022 and 2023. So the net outflow of payments because of debt service has been greater than net inflow of new financing, the first thing, and that accounts for 3 billion in total reduction with international reserves, contraction. And the second large component is the balance of oil balance. And Ecuador produces around 470,000 barrels a day of oil, which is a decent number, I would say, if you compare to the size of the economy. 70% of that is exported. But what happens is that we don't have enough industry in order to produce oil derivatives, which are essential to produce gasoline. So what happens with Ecuador is that you export oil barrels, and then you need to import the derivatives in order to produce the naphtha, the gasoline. And that balance has been growing negatively or decreasing over time, and that has created an additional pressure of $2 billion into the international reserves. So those two components are the ones that combined are creating the pressure on international reserves of the country. So at the end, again, you go to the basic equation: how many dollars you are able to get into the country, how many dollars are going outside of the country. Another important sector that, well, a couple of sectors, I would say more real sector, farm groups, agricultural groups, exports, mining, all of those sectors are the ones that are bringing net dollars into the economy, in addition to financial institutions, which are the ones that acquire financial indebtedness from DFIs or different counterparties. And in net, they have been bringing additional funds into the economy to put into the asset side and lending of the economy. So that equation, again, is a sharp reduction in international reserves. And now for 2024, just to close up this specific part, the government has already around $4 billion in arrears with local contractors. Since they didn't have enough money to pay them in 2023, they are carrying these arrears, delayed payments basically, into 2024. And they are looking for additional funding in order to cover this gap. And the government was successful, and this is, sort of transition now to the political part, because the current government was elected in October this year. It's a very new government. And the previous government, his initial term was 4 years, and they had to call for early elections because of political crisis. So we have a president for almost 2 years. We are going to have a president, the one that is now, for until May 2025, and then they're going to call again for elections. And so we're going to have 3 presidents in less than, 5 years around that. And that creates a lot of uncertainty into economic actors, right? So you're not going to do a long-term investment. You're not going to do something. You're just going to keep your OPEX flowing in order to keep your operation until you have more certainty of what is going to happen. So under those situations, what the current government did, which was, I would say, successful, because they knew the crisis that was coming because of this lack of resources, lack of liquidity, they passed different bills and were approved recently, a couple of weeks ago, in the Assembly, which basically increased the value-added tax from 12 to 15%. They created a one-time contribution from financial institutions, which is going to create additional $150 million in funding for this year and additional taxes. All of that is creating around $2 billion, which is going to help to reduce the gap that we were discussing before, but that's not enough. So the next step that the government is expected to do this year is to get or discuss a multi-year staff agreement with the IMF in order to open doors with other multilaterals. And that funding is going to help to close the gap to around 2 to 3 billion by the end of the year, from a gap that was 10 billion or a little more than that when we started the year. With that, you can push these payments in arrears that you have with contractors eventually to 2025 and keep the economy running and comply with your international obligations. Because another important thing is that starting 2025, total amortizations of debt for international governments and capital markets, euro bonds, etc., start increasing, because we defaulted in 2020 because of the COVID pandemic, and we restructure our financing so that we would have 3 years of lower coupon payments. And in 2024 and 5, it will start increasing again, because we actually were preparing ourselves during these years in order to be able to serve the debt. That didn't happen. So now we need to enter into another agreement with an IMF and other creditors in order to be able to have sustainable debt over time. So that's where we are standing now. Very interesting, things happening here, and just stop there.